Good morning. Welcome to Kenya News Update today. I'm your host, and we're beginning with a major international story that has significant implications for democracy, geopolitics, and the future of a key regional power. In Istanbul, Turkey, a courtroom drama of unprecedented scale has begun. The corruption trial of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem Imamoglu and more than 400 other defendants opened on Monday, March 9, 2026. This is not just a legal proceeding. Critics, including international human rights organizations and Western governments, are calling it a politically motivated purge designed to eliminate the main challenger to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's 23-year rule. Imamoglu, who has been in pre-trial detention for nearly a year, was elected as the main opposition party's candidate for the presidential election due in 2028, just days before his detention. The hearing began in a tense atmosphere, with heavy security and protests both inside and outside the courthouse. For the next 12 minutes, we will take a deep dive into this landmark case. We will examine the specific charges, the political context of Erdogan's long tenure, the international reaction, and what this means for Turkey's future, its relationships with the West, and its role in global affairs. We'll present multiple perspectives, from the government's stance to the opposition's outcry, and analyze the hard data surrounding this pivotal moment. Let's start with the sheer scale of this trial, which is what makes it so extraordinary. We are talking about 412 individual defendants all facing charges in a single, consolidated case. The lead defendant is Ekrem Imamoglu, the 54-year-old mayor of Istanbul, Turkey's largest city and economic powerhouse. He is joined by 391 other politicians, civil servants, and businesspeople from his administration and network. The remaining 20 defendants are journalists and civil society activists accused of laundering the proceeds of the alleged corruption or spreading propaganda to cover it up. The prosecution's case, contained in a 15,000-page indictment, alleges a vast, organized criminal network that siphoned public funds through inflated municipal contracts, kickbacks, and fraudulent land deals over a period of 5 years, from 2020 to 2025. The total amount allegedly misappropriated is staggering: 1.2 billion US dollars, or approximately 35 billion Turkish lira at current exchange rates. Convicted, Imamoglu faces a potential sentence of up to 25 years in prison, which would effectively end his political career and bar him from the 2028 election. The trial is expected to last for a minimum of 18 months, with hearings scheduled twice weekly. This timeline conveniently places the verdict in late 2027, just months before the presidential vote. To understand why this trial is happening now, we must look at the political landscape. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan first came to power as prime minister in 2003. After constitutional changes, he became president in 2014 and was re-elected in 2018 and again in 2023. That's 23 consecutive years at the helm of Turkish politics. His party, the AKP, has dominated parliament for most of that period. However, the political winds have shifted. The Turkish economy has faced severe challenges, with inflation peaking at over 85% in 2023 and still hovering around 40% today. The lira has lost over 90% of its value against the US dollar in the past decade. In the 2023 local elections, Erdogan's AKP suffered a devastating blow. It lost control of Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir, Turkey's 3 largest cities, to the opposition CHP party. Ekrem Imamoglu's victory in Istanbul was particularly symbolic. He first won a controversial election in 2019, which was annulled by the Supreme Electoral Council, an institution critics say is under government influence. He then won the run by an even larger margin, cementing his status as a national figure and Erdogan's most potent rival. Since then, Imamoglu has used the Istanbul mayor's office as a powerful platform, showcasing competent governance and directly challenging Erdogan's narrative. Polls in early 2025 showed Imamoglu leading Erdogan in a hypothetical presidential matchup by 8 to 12 percentage points. His detention in April 2025 and this subsequent trial are widely seen as the government's response to this existential threat. Now, let's hear the government's perspective. The Turkish Ministry of Justice and the prosecutors have been adamant that this is purely a legal matter, devoid of political interference. In a press conference yesterday, Justice Minister Yilmaz Tunç stated, "The judiciary in Turkey operates independently and impartially. The evidence against Mr. Imamoglu and his associates is overwhelming and based on forensic financial audits, whistleblower testimonies, and documentary proof. No one is above the law, regardless of their political position. To suggest this trial is political is an insult to our judges and prosecutors, and it undermines the rule of law. The prosecution points to specific evidence. They allege that 27 major municipal contracts for services like waste management, public transportation upgrades, and park renovations were awarded to a consortium of 12 companies at prices inflated by an average of 35%. They claim kickbacks totaling $280 million were funneled back to officials through shell companies in 3 offshore jurisdictions: Cyprus, Malta, and the British Virgin Islands. Furthermore, they allege that 15 parcels of public land in prime Istanbul locations were sold to developers with close ties to the mayor's office at 40% below market value, resulting in a loss to the city of $450 million. The government-controlled Anadolu Agency has run extensive coverage of these allegations, framing the case as a long-overdue crackdown on deep-seated corruption in the opposition-run municipality. However, the opposition and international observers tell a starkly different story. The main opposition Republican People's Party, or CHP, has called the trial a judicial coup and a fabricated fantasy. CHP leader Özgür Özel addressed supporters outside the courthouse, saying, "This is not a trial of Ekrem Imamoglu. This is a trial of democracy itself. It is the desperate act of a regime that has lost at the ballot box and now seeks to imprison its way back to power. The real corruption is the corruption of the judiciary, which has been turned into a weapon against the people's will." International human rights groups have echoed this sentiment. Amnesty International's Turkey researcher, in a statement, called the charges politically motivated and lacking credible evidence, noting that the broad and vague nature of the accusations, the inclusion of journalists and activists, and the timing all point to a strategy of eliminating political competition. The European Union, which has long stalled membership talks with Turkey, issued a cautious statement expressing deep concern about the case and its implications for the rule of law and democratic norms. Perhaps most significantly, the United States State Department, under the Trump administration, has been notably silent. While previous administrations might have issued strong condemnations, the current stance, according to analysts, reflects President Trump's transactional foreign policy and his personal rapport with President Erdogan. A senior administration official, speaking on background, only said the U.S. is monitoring the situation closely and expects Turkey to adhere to its international legal obligations. The trial's mechanics themselves raise serious questions about due process. The case is being heard by a panel of 3 judges in the Istanbul 13th High Criminal Court, a court that has previously handled several high-profile cases against government critics. All 412 defendants are being tried together, making it virtually impossible for the defense to adequately represent each individual. The court has denied 90% of the defense's requests for additional evidence or to hear certain witnesses. Furthermore, of the 120 prosecution witnesses, 70 are anonymous, identified only by code names, which the defense argues violates the right to a fair trial. Imamoglu's lead lawyer, in her opening statement, highlighted that the financial audit cited by the prosecution was conducted by a firm whose contract with the Justice Ministry was renewed just 2 weeks before the indictment was filed, suggesting a conflict of interest. She also presented a counter-audit from an independent international firm that found no evidence of systematic fraud in the Istanbul municipality's books, with irregularities accounting for less than 0.5% of total expenditures, which is below the global average for large cities. The court rejected the motion to admit this counter-audit as evidence. Let's visualize the core of the prosecution's financial claims. They allege the corruption scheme operated across 5 key sectors of municipal spending. The potential consequences of this trial extend far beyond Turkey's borders. Turkey is a critical and a TO ally, controls the strategic Bosporus Strait, and plays a key role in conflicts in Syria, the South Caucasus, and now, increasingly, in Africa. Under Erdogan, Turkey has pursued a more independent and assertive foreign policy, sometimes clashing with allies. A Turkey that is perceived as sliding deeper into authoritarianism could further strain relations with the European Union and complicate NATO cohesion, especially regarding issues like defense procurement and regional strategy. Domestically, the trial has already sparked protests. In the first 2 days of the hearing, Turkish police detained over 800 protesters in Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir for illegal assembly. Social media platforms Twitter and Instagram experienced slowdowns in Turkey during key moments of the trial, a common tactic used by authorities to curb dissemination of information. The Turkish lira fell by 2% against the dollar on the first day of the trial, reflecting market nervousness about political instability. Looking ahead to 2028, if Imamoglu is convicted and barred from running, the opposition will be deprived of its most popular candidate. This could lead to political fragmentation within the opposition, or potentially to more dramatic scenarios, including widespread civil unrest or a boycott of the elections, which would undermine their legitimacy. On the other hand, an acquittal, while unlikely in the current climate, would be a seismic event, catapulting Imamoglu to an even higher stature and potentially triggering a political crisis for Erdogan. We've presented the government's legal arguments and the opposition's claims of political persecution. Now, let's consider a third perspective, that of the Turkish public. Polling data from late 2025, after Imamoglu's detention but before the trial, reveals a deeply polarized nation. When asked, "Do you believe the charges against Mayor Imamoglu are politically motivated?" 46% of respondents said yes, 42% said no, and 12% were undecided. This split largely mirrors the political divide in the country. However, on the question of the economy, dissatisfaction is much broader. 78% of Turks rated the national economy as poor or very poor. This economic discontent is the opposition's strongest card, and the government's attempt to sideline Imamoglu can be seen as an effort to prevent the 2028 election from becoming a referendum on economic management. The trial is being broadcast live on a single, pro-government television channel. Opposition channels are limited to commentary from their studios. This creates two parallel realities for Turkish citizens, one where they see a corrupt politician finally facing justice, and another where they see a popular leader being unjustly persecuted. This information divide makes national reconciliation increasingly difficult. In conclusion, the trial of Ekrem Imamoglu and 400 others is a watershed moment. It is a stark test for Turkey's democratic institutions, which have been under sustained pressure for years. It is a bold gamble by President Erdogan to secure his political future by removing his most dangerous rival through the courts rather than the ballot box. The international community watches with unease, but its leverage appears limited. The economic stakes are enormous, both for Turkey's struggling population and for foreign investors. As this 12-month legal drama unfolds, it will shape not only who leads Turkey in 2028, but also the very nature of the Turkish state. Will it continue its shift toward a more centralized, authoritarian system, or will the resilience of its civil society and the weight of economic reality force a different path? The answers will begin to emerge in that Istanbul courtroom. For Kenya News Update today, this has been a deep dive into a story with global repercussions. We will continue to follow it closely. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for more in-depth analysis of the stories that shape our world.